Time to get serious. Hold on. Sorry, we're just prepping. Makeup just left the room.
Yeah, makeup just left the room,
Yeah.
and actually we have a peanut gallery this week. So welcome back, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm John Williams, owner and winemaker of Frogs Leap.
And I'm Rory Williams, owner and winemaker of Frogs Leap Winery. Welcome to another edition of Day Drinking with my dad and I. You guys are crazy. You're joining us every week. We're having a ton of fun.
We have some people who've been here almost every week. Shout out if you've been here for all 6 days. You are like the diehard.
And please go get help. Please go get help. We have resources available in the chat. Operators are standing by. There's something wrong with you, but thank you guys so much for joining us once again. Couple of reminders for those of you on Zoom, please use the Q&A. I've got it right here in front of me. I just learned how to read this past week, and so be able to look at questions and answer questions. You getting thirsty or something?
It is day drinking.
Yeah, that's true.
Right now,
not daytime drink, staring at the bottle.
Hey, we're really excited about today because we're going to do my favorite of all the wines we make at Frogs Leap. Everyone asks me what my favorite is, and here we're.
And it changes from week to week.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Right. Sorry.
It has always been Merlot. It has always been Merlot. So we're really excited to share with you these Merlots that we're spanning 10 years apart between these, and even a few of you have the 93. So, but first up is the 2013 Raised Block, and that was no, this can't be the first time we had these grapes, obviously, but this is
no, not the first time we've had this grape.
Yeah.
Just to, if you guys are curious about exactly which wines we're tasting, you guys should have most of the wines in front of you, but this is the 2013 Rossi Vineyard Raised Block. You, just as a reminder, you can see, take a look at these wines and any past or previous or future wines on interactive.frogsleep.com. But yeah, Raised Block. Our oldest block of Merlot here at Frogs Leap.
What year? These were planted in
1991.
1991.
Yeah.
Ah, you were just a lad.
I was just a wee lad. Actually, I was just a wee lad.
You're 7.
Yeah.
I keep pointing out how old you are.
Already calling all the shots.
Yeah, you were pretty much bossing me around at that point too. Yeah. Merlot is such a great variety. It goes beautifully with so many different kind of foods, and we'll talk about that. It is a very widely planted grape all around the world. I think it's one of the most widely planted grapes in all of France, for example,
Yep.
right? But has adapted itself to areas of the world all over the place, including the Napa Valley, although much less so now than at one point. So it is a variety that is very site specific, very soil specific, if it's not done right. And I think that it's part of the reason I love it. It's a temperamental grape. It's difficult to grow. If you don't have it in the right soils, you have to fight with it even in the right soils in many respects. Tell me a little bit about the growing of Merlot from your point of view, as I have a little sip here.
Yeah, we get thirsty here already. Merlot's, it's a bit of a crazy grape to grow because Napa Valley it really is an Eden as far as growing grapes. It's relatively easy to grow grapes, and don't tell anybody because then I'd be out of a job. But it's
even he can do it.
Even I can do it. But Merlot itself is a very finicky grape, and it's interesting because its reputation is often to the other side, where it's the easy grape. It's easy to pronounce. It's easy to make. You see it everywhere. But it's really not the case with us farming it. It's a grape that's very prone to setting poorly. Set is the viticultural term for when the fruit actually, converts from flowers into fruit. And so set's the term for describing.
We try not to get into the birds and the bees.
Yeah, sorry.
It's a family program.
Yeah, sorry. And rated R now, talking about the flowers and the berries. But Merlot is very prone to shatter. And what that means is that even though the flowers will bloom on a Merlot cluster, oftentimes it's very sensitive to the weather that can happen and to the rate of growth of the vine during the flowering season. And you'll come back to a Merlot vine a few weeks later after the fruit is supposed to have set.
And there are no berries.
And there are no berries on it. Yeah. And you're going, well, what did I do all this work for?
That's very, very bad. I had to say it.
Get off.
No. But vigor is a big part of this problem too. I mean, if it grows too quickly, this forces shatter, which then of course reduces the yield, which causes more vigor. And of course, vigor can lead to green flavors as well, right? So,
so when we talk about vigor in grapevines, what that should sound obvious, but basically it's that kind of tendency to just grow really strongly, really quickly, especially early on in the year. And Merlot it's one of the first red varieties to bud out. Actually, one of the first to break its buds in the spring that we grow. And consequently, it's often pretty far out there and growing at a rapid pace early on in the season. And actually, a lot of what we're doing out there in the vineyard is to try to slow it down a little bit, because it can be almost too fast for its own good early on in the season. So Merlot is actually a lot of work, and that's what's kind of interesting. It's a little bit more sensitive to vigor issues than Cabernet Sauvignon. It's very, very soil specific, and I think that's kind of one of the biggest issues with Merlot out there, or that in the past, has been planting in inappropriate spots. And really, Dad, I think your kind of first experience with Merlot would have been with some of the great Bordeaux wines, the great right bank wines.
Of course, yeah. And here's where we learn our lesson, is that they've learned this lesson over time, that in the well-drained soils that are perfect for Cabernet Sauvignon, not so good for Merlot. But in the heavier soils, the more clay-like soils that slow down the growth, clay means colder soils, they slow down the growth. So all this basic rule of thumb is, the more a vine grows like a weed, the more the wine's going to taste like a weed. So green flavors are the result of growing too quickly. So much of what we're doing in Merlot, as you tried to explain inarticulately, is we're trying to get it to slow down. So like, you're not even suckering the trunks now, because you want to leave the energy growing these so that it doesn't grow too quickly.
So for those of you who joined us during the organic farming seminar, we talked about suckering, or shoot thinning, which is us clearing all the unwanted shoots away from the growing area to increase airflow, which helps reduce disease pressure, which allows us to spray a lot less. The issue with that is that you're going to get more vigor in the remaining shoots that you leave. And so with Merlot, we have a trick that we developed over the years, where we will leave any extra shoots that are down out of the fruiting zone of the grape, just to slow down the vine, while opening up the top of the vine, so that you get airflow and you get a healthy disease balance, or basically, resistance to disease in that area. So it's a bit of a tricky. It requires multiple passes. It requires extra work, and it really only does work in those proper soils. And I think that's what's interesting about Merlot in Napa County, and really all over, is that Napa is defined by these big alluvial fans coming out of the hills, and that's right in the centers of those alluvial fans. You have lots of gravel, lots of well-drained soils. That's where you find your Cabernet Sauvignon. It's on the margins of those fans where you get clay and silt, and those areas aren't very big, but they're critical, because that's where Merlot belongs. And so there's actually a great—
Have you smelled this wine yet? This is unbelievable. This
I
is
have,
great.
yeah. There's actually a great question on here: what percentage of your vineyards are planted with Merlot? And I would think that I'd know that percentage off the top of my head, but it's a relatively small percentage. We don't grow that much Merlot. At this point, most of our Merlot is actually estate grown, and it really just does exist in those kind of clay-rich areas.
Well, we have two places. One right here at the Red Barn, where the winery is, and as you pass down through the Cabernet Sauvignon, the soil gets progressively more clay-like, and that's we grow Merlot there. So that's about half of the Red Barn. That's the biggest planting of. I got to tell you, about 10.
I'm doing the math in my head. It's about 10% of our acreage that we farm.
Yeah.
And that's that is.
So it's about 10% of our production. Amazing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. How does that work? Yeah, the math works out. But for us, it's that decision. We've talked about this in the past, about planting the right variety in the right place. It's just so critical to making the variety work correctly. And this particular block, what we call Ray's block, or the North Creek block, is at our Rossi Vineyard, which is mostly Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet Sauvignon. But there's a little dog leg in the corner of the vineyard that has this beautiful clay-rich soil that makes some of our best Merlot. And this is our oldest planting of Merlot. It's definitely in the right place, and just consistently, year in and year out, makes a fabulous Merlot.
And named for Ray Rossi. So Ray and his sister Louise ran the farm once their mother and brother passed away. His brother passed away in '49. And so Ray and Louise managed this vineyard. Ray was 84 when no, he was older than that. When he would have been in his 90s when this wine was made. So here's to Ray Rossi. I love the beauty of this wine. Now, this is 5 years in the bottle, or 7 years old now, and you just really see why we put these wines down. Look at this. I mean, some of you may have the 16 or 17 Merlot, which is absolutely gorgeous. I'm drinking it at home right now, but it is still got the baby fat. It's still got the real plush. Here's the classic nature of Merlot really comes through in this wine.
For those of you that have it in front of you, you know, Merlot is often sometimes, I think, unfairly characterized by just being this kind of, hey, juicy red fruit, and it's nice and soft.
Or Cabernet with training wheels.
It's Cabernet with training wheels, nice and soft and easy, and it should be, you know, this is almost one of the wines we make that I like the best with more bottle age on it. I feel like sometimes Merlots are drunk too early because it's one of those grapes that is almost, once it gets into the bottle, right after it's been bottled and right after it's been released, it can be a little reticent, and it can be the kind of wine that just needs that time to unfold. I've had the experience of drinking some of our Merlots, and they get into bottle, and we'll take a bottle off of the bottling line, and you taste it, and you go, huh.
You're not supposed to do that, but
I really should. I should tell somebody about it. But you know, we call it the non-inventory.
You have to sign that out. You know.
Yeah, I can't deal with all these rules these days. But it's the kind of wine that right and fresh off the bottling line, you kind of go, well, it is nice and soft and red fruited and not terribly complex. And then you drink that same wine even just 1 year later, and it's like, oh my God. And that's what I think this wine is showing, where you've got, yes, the red fruit, it's got that beautiful softness and the beautiful plumminess, but this has got a lot of those.
Plum is a perfect word, I think, for this wine. I think it is proper, or at least the way I think of Merlot as opposed to its cousin Cabernet Sauvignon, is you're really looking for the red fruit of this wine. And so even so red plum, but even almost into raspberry, into some of the aromas that you would get out of a Pinot Noir, in my opinion. And I think that points to why not only is Merlot difficult to grow, but it is a challenge to make Merlot. I think it's probably the thing that gives us the most fits, because on one hand, you're making a Sauvignon wine, so you have all the tannin issues and so on. So you would think you would treat it like Cabernet Sauvignon, but because of the red fruit, those fruits are very delicate. And so so you're making it almost more like a Pinot Noir. Well, making Pinot Noir and Cabernet side by side, they're completely different ways, because you got to.
Just to pause you, since you've got a lot of experience, I think you've got a little bit of experience at Pinot Noir, actually the first name in Pinot Noir.
Oh, that's right.
So you just said making a wine like a Cabernet versus making a wine like a Pinot Noir. What does that mean?
Well, so much of what you're trying to do when you make red wine, of course, is extracting the color and the flavor out of the skin. So you're fermenting on the skins, and how you handle that cap, or the cap management, is a big part of making red wine. So are you pumping over? Are you punching down? Are you submerging the cap? Are you doing rack and returns? There are dozens of different ways that we can keep the juice in contact with the skins. When you're making Pinot Noir, that's usually you use a very gentle method, often pushing down or something. You certainly did a lot of that in Burgundy, right? So you know. But whereas Cabernet, you're really almost looking for a very aggressive style of cap management. And you face the dilemma of both of those approaches, I think, when you make Merlot, if I can put it that way.
No, and I think you can taste in this wine, you can taste a little bit of that balance in there, where I'm getting that beautiful plummy red fruit. It's really, that's really delicious, but it's also got some of that dusty, the graphite, the residual character of those kind of herbal aromas, which, that's the Sauvignon side of Merlot that's really peeking through, and it adds complexity to the wine. And the difficult thing is finding that balance between the two sides of it.
I wonder how it would taste 10 years older.
Whoa, are you saying?
Oh
my God. We've got another bottle. Thank goodness, I was getting bored with this one.
No, I'm not getting bored with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I am. My mind is just, whenever I think of Merlot, I can't drink Merlot without thinking, oh my God, what am I going to cook with that tonight? And to me, the versatility of Merlot is amazing when it comes. You're a good cook. You like to cook, but
I'm an amazing cook. Actually,
you're okay. You take forever though. You just take too long. But roast chicken or fish wine. Merlot just opens up a ton of possibilities.
It is an incredibly flexible wine, and that's why it's one of the wines you stated as your favorite wine. This is actually my brother Kyler's favorite wine as well. All the wines we make, The Merlot has always been his favorite. And, we don't often recognize the fact that I've got two siblings on but the 2003, actually kind of a cool story with the 2003 dad that I just learned because I was drinking beer with Connor right before we did this. The 2003 was the bottle that he proposed to his fiancee with.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So my brother and his fiancee Annie. Cheers to you guys.
To Annie, man. I don't
you guys are relaxing drinking beer, not watching this right now, but someday you'll see this. They were supposed to. They're getting married this summer, and plans are on hold a little bit, but. That 03 Merlot really went down well. Really sealed the deal, I guess.
Well, we should have a big bottle of this we'll have to open a big bottle for you guys. But here's so now 10 years of age. Oh, by the way, can I share a little bit something? Because I was just quickly checking the note on the 2013, and I recommended that you serve it with duck a la orange.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I've never had duck a la orange.
It sounds really good.
Yeah, I know. I figure it's gotta be good, right? No one's gonna. So what I'm saying is sometimes I recommend the suggestions for what you should have with our wines, and I've never actually had it with so isn't that terrible?
Your imagination knows no bounds. The 2003, which hopefully most of you have in your glass right now.
Wow.
What are you getting out of this, Dad?
Well, it's already, you can see the tertiary aroma starting to really come forward in all the forest floor, and yet there's that fruit.
Yeah, it's this, I almost get that kind of red fruit and all that plumminess more once I'm drinking it, as opposed to on the aromas. The aromas are very much that kind of earthy, mush forest floor, like he said, the sous-bois and all that. And it's, I think this is really delicious.
It is delicious. Interesting to note, this is 100% Merlot. We usually, and this is something we really would need to talk about, is usually we will use a little Cabernet Sauvignon or a little Cabernet Franc, as would be traditional in where these wines are made, just to build a little structure in the wine, give a little raciness to the wine, a little extra complexity to the wine. But some vintages, Merlot will have all that on its own, and those are the great vintages. Those are the ones I really enjoy collecting.
There's actually a good question from John Ward on here. I had thought that Merlot was largely blended with Cabernet and Bordeaux. Do you vinify it without blending? And so
here's your answer. And look at some of look, everyone, the elephant in the room, of course, is the rarest and most expensive red wine in the entire universe is 100% Merlot.
Yeah.
And we were supposed to have a bottle of that today, but
we couldn't afford it.
Yeah, we couldn't afford it.
we were thinking about putting a dummy bottle up here and pretending that
I think maybe I'm going to stop my Maui condo fund and get John a bottle of Petrus.
How's that condo fund doing?
That's
been going for 30 years.
It's going to happen.
It's often. You will find it often blended in Bordeaux, its traditional home, especially blended on the right bank, what's called the right bank of Bordeaux, so the Saint-Emilion and Pomerol areas. You'll see it blended very often with Cabernet Franc, occasionally with Cabernet Sauvignon. And on the left bank, where the famous Medoc wines, which are mostly Cabernet Sauvignon, will usually have some Merlot blended in. But again, that's purely a function of what soils are dominant in those particular areas. Right. And if you have a chateau, like if you're Chateau Petrus, and all of your soil is very appropriate for Merlot, that's what you're going to plant there. Yeah. Cabernet Franc often lives in that kind of very, very slim border region between Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot appropriate soils. And so actually right next to our our 2 blocks of Merlot at our Rossi vineyard, where one of which is the raised block, we have the only block of Cabernet Franc at Rossi, which is a very small block, but does extremely well.
Yeah, it does.
And so it's just kind of, you can think about it as a spectrum of soils and a spectrum of flavors that work together. And it's really up to you as a viticulturalist, as a winery, to decide, hey, this is the right variety.
We keep coming back to this point. We talked a lot about it in the organic farming center. If you're not paying attention to what your soils are and what their capacity are, you're just never going to make great wine. It really is the basis of how this all works.
It certainly makes your job in the winery much easier. Huh?
Yeah.
As long as you've had great grapes delivered to you.
Wow. That's amazing, the depth of this wine. Yeah, 2003.
2003.
Wow, so this would have been vintified at the old Frog Farm.
That's 93.
93. Oh, I'm skipping a decade.
You're skipping a decade.
We're going to get to the 93. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for keeping me on track.
By the way, did you get a haircut?
I did get a haircut. Well, I gave myself a haircut.
You gave yourself a haircut?
Yeah.
That sounds dangerous. Did you get bored one night?
What do you guys think? I did pretty good.
Yeah, you did pretty good. I gave myself a haircut as well, but it didn't go very well.
You guys need some loppers. You don't need scissors anymore.
I asked one of the guys on the crew to get out the electric shears to cut it.
We don't want to jam those things up.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God. Yeah. Hair. We've run out of things to talk about. Can we just drink this wine? Gosh. This is amazing. Amazing. What do you guys think? What would you have this with? Duck all or something else, maybe? Yeah.
You know, it's Merlot is one of those wines that I think really does change what you drink with it over time. You know, early on, this wine is super fruity, but it has a little bit more of that tannin going on when it's very young. The 13 kind of being kind of a tighter vintage definitely does that as well. But I think, you know, that's when I think it's maybe part of the misperception with Merlot a little bit is that early on it has some of that residual tannin and will appear to be, you know, kind of like that Cabernet with training wheels. But really what it is it's just setting itself on a different path. And it's fully possessed of all that potential to age. It's fully possessed of all that potential for, you know, great flavors and complexity and all that, but it's going a different direction than Cabernet. This wine is not aging like our Cabernets. And I think that it's very much
What do you mean by that?
So I think this 03, I'm tasting in this that kind of.
God, remember 03? We were in
Bordeaux.
We were in Bordeaux when it was so hot, and when people were dying like crazy in Paris, and it was hot.
But it's, you know, I'm getting with this wine. It's almost kind of funny because I recognize a little bit of aged Zinfandel in a way with this, where you have that kind of core of juicy fruit to the center of the wine that is so delicious and makes it feel youthful in a way. But its tertiary aromas, its kind of complexity has gone a different direction than Cabernet. Cabernet is going to have the cedar and the graphite and all that.
I think it'd be a fun tasting to do maybe 20 years of age, a Zin Cab and a Merlot, and see how the flavors are developing. Yeah, because I get what you're saying. It's like mothers don't let your Zinfandels grow up to be Cabernet. I think Merlot fits right into that song.
And actually, there's an interesting question here from Paul Wheeler that I think fits in.
Paul Wheeler? Oh
we were
my
just talking
God,
about.
I thought we had a censor on this.
Saying that there's very little oak in this wine. What type of barrels are we using for Merlot and time in barrel? And it's interesting because in general, when I break down what kind of barrels we use for Merlot are generally much gentler than you would use with Cabernet. Cabernet often will use a barrel that maybe, you know, if you're tasting it out of brand new oak, tastes a little oakier. It's got a little bit more toast to it. They can be a little bit more aggressive with the tannins coming out of that barrel. Whereas we like our Merlot in a lot more neutral oak. So this has about 10% less new oak than our typical Cabernet, and in oak that's been toasted very little. So it's this kind of gentle approach to it to kind of, I think, accommodate some of that soft red fruit.
Well, I don't like to give you props, but I would say what you're bringing to the winery right now is a much more sophisticated view of what cultivars, what sections of the different vineyard fit into different oak. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of experimentation. As you know, my general attitude about oak over the many years that we've been making Frog's Leap wines is if you can smell the oak, I've got too much of it. Basically, to me, it's a little bit like cologne. Is that if you can smell it and God forbid identify what kind of cologne it is, it's way too much cologne. But if it's not there, you miss it. You know, so it's got to be this kind of real subtle sort of character. You've taken that to a whole different degree in our own program.
But stemming off of that, I think you're absolutely right. It's very difficult to understand. It's very easy to understand how to make a wine taste oaky, you know?
Yeah.
I've seen it. One of the first internships I ever did was in another country. We won't name the winery, but they showed up, and I showed up for my very first day, and they had a wine that they had put different amounts of synthetic oak flavor into, and asked me which one I liked best.
So this is a cheap winery that just made bulk wine?
It was not, unfortunately. It was a little scandalous, to be honest. But they put this oak flavor into the wine directly, and they asked me, hey, which one do you like best? You like the one with the most amount of synthetic oak flavor in it, right? Because you're an American. You like these big oaky wines. And I'm going, no, I like the one with none of that in it. And that they didn't believe me at the time. But it showed you just kind of, sometimes I think some people could think about oak as the point of oak is oak flavoring to the wine.
Right.
And to my mind, with Frog Sleep wines and the way that I've learned from you, Dad, how to, and really the way that I've learned from well-grown, well-made wines all over the world, is the oak should be invisible. And often, you're right, you can often sometimes, if you're tasting the wine, if you get familiar with barrels, you can actually go, oh, that's they bought a little too much Taranto this year, which is kind of like, it's a crazy thought to be able to taste the barrel more than the wine.
I can actually, if I can tell a funny story, is that often as I go back and taste older vintages, particularly if we do like a number of them at one time, I can always tell which vintage followed a prosperous year from the year before, because I would have a little more money and I would buy a few more oak barrels, and that wine would be oakier. So I could kind of say, oh, it must have been a good year the year before this wine. And because the barrels are our single largest expense after grapes, and they can run a lot of what's a good barrels of almost $1,000 now, right?
A good barrel is $1,000 even, and it's interesting because I talked about, okay, well, you don't want oak flavor out of an oak barrel, so what do you want? I mean, because you're getting a little bit of oak flavor out of any new oak barrel, but what's the point of a new oak barrel? And it's difficult to describe, because I think it's ideally shown, especially in this 13 and in the 03, and really in a lot of the wines we make, is the idea is to have that sense of restraint, but this kind of deep well of flavor, deep well of character, really good oak. The correct oak usage is kind of the right way to think about it, is the other way around, where you often think about, like, wow, boy, this wine doesn't have a whole lot of character to it, doesn't have a whole lot of flavor to it. Better throw some oak flavoring in there to make it taste like something.
Yeah. It'll smell good, put more cologne on.
Yeah, put more cologne on, exactly. Whereas if you smell bad, you should be thinking about the other thing, which is to make yourself better first.
Yeah, exactly.
Not to stretch the metaphor.
Yeah, no, let's we're getting into rough territory here.
But in other words, the correct way to think about oak is that they're better wine, more balanced wine, more powerful wine, more interesting wine, better grown wine deserves more new oak and can handle more new oak.
Is enhanced by more.
Is enhanced by it because the wine itself has so much character.
I think it's a little counterintuitive. You would think.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you can taste, the top end Burgundies and things like that. This is Pinot Noir. It's a delicate grape.
Yeah.
Often 100% new oak, but you can't taste it at all because this is the best vineyard from a great producer, properly managed, properly made.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of the correct use of oak, and that's the decisions about what oak to use and how to integrate that and how much to apply and all of that really plays into making a wine fully express the site. And that sounds a little counterintuitive, where a barrel comes from France and how could it express a site in Rutherford? It really gets down into the nitty gritty of winemaking, and it's a whole rabbit hole to go down in terms of what forest in France pairs best with.
Well, or American oak versus French oak. I mean, or Hungarian oak, right? Their oak comes from a lot of different places too. And so this is a very subtle art that you've spent a lot of time thinking about.
I'd spend more time if we had a bigger barrel budget.
Well, that's that's your job out there, you guys.
Yeah. Why is 100% Merlot so rare and expensive? That's a good question.
Well, first of all, we already pointed out that Merlot is difficult to grow and can find imbalances. So it's when you have a variety like that, it is not a clear on a clear path to a varietal wine where it needs supplement in certain vintages, both structurally and aromatically, it tends to lean on its cousins. And so you need almost not only perfect soils, but a perfect vintage to produce a 100% Merlot. And to consistently do that year in, year out, now you're getting into the rarefied air. We had this discussion a little bit with Zinfandel, in that Zinfandel can benefit by co-fermentation with Pédicère or Carignan and so on and so forth. It is the rare vineyard where 100% Zinfandel can thrive as well. So those places are very, very unique, and then they get a marvelous reputation because that red fruit character is. And then of course you get the status of something like Petrus, and then it's no longer about the wine anymore. It's really about that this has got such a deeper, profound reputation that it becomes collectible just because it's collectible.
Yeah, but that reputation, that collectability is built over time and built with presumably a solid reputation. I've never had Petrus myself, so I imagine it's actually pretty good.
Come over to the house later.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Come on, Meg.
But yeah, we were talking a little bit earlier about, why would it be so rare and expensive to have 100%? You can find 100% Merlot out there at your local grocery store. But the real question is, should that be 100% Merlot? And really, is that a proper expression of 100% Merlot? And I think that's what's rare and expensive. That's what's difficult to achieve. We really achieve it just in very good years, where it has all of those different dimensions.
Here's my caution. That would tend to argue that those are the best wines. But what I'd argue is that in the vintages where we need a little Cabernet Franc, there's nothing wrong with those wines. We've made a better wine by including a little Cabernet Sauvignon and a little Cabernet Franc. So it isn't like it's better, it's just it's different. Because we can have a vintage. I'm not explaining this very, very well, but I want to be cautious of thinking that you should only get 100% Merlot. I don't think that's true. I think you have to rely on the judgment of the vintner to know that that's a vintage where 100% Merlot actually works out.
Yeah, I think that's right. Are barrels reused? If yes, how many can you get out of a barrel? We'll typically, for the Merlot, is only about 15 to 20% new oak every year. That's a pretty low percentage. And that's basically a number that we've arrived at out of trial and error.
I think that we are excited about, barrels are so complex, you guys, because every cooper who makes these barrels has a slightly different technique, how long they age the wood or air dry the wood, how they fire it to bend the wood, how much heat is absorbed, what the moisture content in the staves before they do the firing. There's so many things that go into the coopering of a barrel. And the barrel guys come around and my barrel's best because we do this and this and this and this. It takes a lot of patience to sort through that and get to the truth. And that also requires a lot of, in a barrel that's perfect for one vintage might not be perfect for the next. So you can't just decide. You have to do a lot of tasting and a lot of analysis.
Dad, you ready for a little 93?
I think so. I think I want to complete the path here. Although I have to say right now, the 03 is almost tasting younger than the 13. It's going back.
I think actually, if you've got this, pour a little bit of the 03 in your glass and allow it to open up, because you're absolutely right. At first, this wine, when it got into the glass, it was all tertiary. It was all the earthy forest floor. It was a little bit quiet, and now with time in the glass, with a little bit of air in the glass, now it's just that red fruit.
No. So I thought I'd mix my glasses up, to be honest with you. Oh, look at that cork there. What'd you do? Look at that.
What did you do, man? You ordered this cork,
That's been in the bottle for a while, I guess, huh?
So Dad, this is the, for those of you that have it, this is the 1993 Merlot. Dad, your fourth vintage of Merlot.
Fourth vintage of Merlot. We sometimes call Merlot the newcomer at Frogsley because we didn't start producing it until 1990. So it is a relatively a recent addition to our portfolio. Only been making it for now, you do the math, 30 years. So this was our fourth. This would have been made at the Frog Farm, aged in a temporary warehouse and bottled here at Frog Leap. So this wine spans really this huge transition from the partnership when we started the winery with your mom and Larry, and then we left the Frog Farm and we started Turley, and then Turley took over at that location, and we moved to this property in '94. So this wine's right in the middle of it, and a tumultuous time. I mean, you were all not quite 10 years old when this wine was.
1993 was the first year I got shipped off to summer camp because I think my parents realized, oh shit, I don't know this kid around there in the summer.
We sent you this guy like you were two. No, you were right. Perfect.
I think there's an interesting question that's very relevant to this wine, which is very, very cool. I've always loved the 93, but in your early years of growing and producing Merlot, what challenges did you have to overcome? I'm interested in knowing from you what it was like to approach a completely new variety at a time when things were crazy. The winery was growing, and you were. Yeah,
we didn't own these grapes. These are purchased grapes. Yeah. They're from the Yount Mill Vineyard and Truchard Vineyard, about 50-50, and with a little Cabernet thrown into the mix. Probably from Bottuello or somewhere else. So you redouble the complexity if you don't grow the grapes yourself, obviously, right? And because you don't have that knowledge, you can walk the vineyard a million times, you can taste other wines made from that vineyard, but you're doing a lot of hunching when it comes to making a wine like this. And to only have 4 years of experience making, although I'd made a little work with Merlot at Stag Sleep, but that had been a number of years before. So you just learning as you go, but we did pretty good, didn't we?
Yes.
This wine's amazing.
This is delicious, and I think
who's the winemaker?
Fabulous winemaker.
Oh,
I think there's an interesting question from Rob on here about curious where we see the 2003 going over the next 5 to 10 years, and I think it's interesting because I think you get a pretty good picture of it with the 93, which if you still have the 03 in your glass, take a whiff of it, and you're getting just the tiniest bit of the kind of soy sauce kind of very late to develop kind of character of aged red wines that have good balance, and you're just getting a tiny bit of that. If you taste the 93, if you have that with you, the 93 already has a lot more of that going on.
I wish Rob would get back to us, because I think Rob, I would have answered your question differently if you'd asked me the very minute I tasted the wine, or within the first couple tastes of it.
Yeah.
But I don't know, and we've talked about this in other tastings, 10 minutes into this wine, it can really, it would change significantly. And whereas I think your thought that this wine probably was pretty close to peak, and I think it is, and it depends on what you call peak, but I think after 10 minutes of it opening up, I would give this plenty of opportunity over the next 10 years.
I give it 100 points right now.
Well, that goes without saying.
Of course. No, but you touched on a good point, Dad, which is the question of peak and ascend and decline and all of that.
Right.
And a lot of it, I think, is about, we've said this in the past, about what do you want out of the wine?
Right.
What are you looking for from the wine? The 13 still has all that useful power. It's got a little bit of tannin to it. It's got that kind of bright red fruit still going on, and it'll continue to have that for a few more years. The 03 has started to develop some of those tertiary aromas. It's a little bit more earthy. Takes a little bit of time to really open up. The 93 is
oh my God, I mean,
all complexity.
This is why you put them in the cellar. This is almost 30-year-old wine, and yet look at it where it is right now, and to have lost the chance to try a wine like this 30 years old, 30 years into it is a great shame. This is one of the great joys in life. This is beautiful.
Which is why we highly recommend buying at least 2 cases of every wine upon release, so that you can taste it and come to your own conclusion over the course of 4 years.
I know that sounds like a joke, but honestly, that's what you have to do to either that or be a frog fellow, apparently.
Little plug for the frog fellowship.
I was plugging the fellowship, but wow, amazing. Please let us know what you think of this wine, guys. What are you saying out there? I think Now I know not everyone has this, but I mean, it's here you see. I mean, these are 10 years apart. This is amazing. It's really kind of fun.
So Dad, we have the most upvoted, one of the most upvoted questions ever is about the S word with Merlot, which is it's apparently some movie that I've never seen.
I remember that movie.
Yeah.
It's a dark movie.
Yeah, it is a dark movie, and you know we were gonna try and avoid the topic of Sideways. We get a few questions about it. Sideways is one of those things that you know impacted Merlot sales and the.
Now, does everyone? You're assuming everyone knows what the hell we're talking about out there. Yeah. But this is a movie that saved Merlot. Thank God it came at just the right time. Saved Merlot, and it's an unfortunate movie because I think it has severely damaged the reputation of Pinot Noir. Because Merlot became a very popular variety for a while. People started planting it everywhere. We've already talked about this. It only grows in a few places. A lot of bad Merlot was being made by a lot of people. It hurt the reputation of Merlot. And now all those people have abandoned Merlot who are idiots and are have planted too much Pinot Noir, and they're destroying the reputation of Pinot Noir. Look, it all comes back to the same thing, and you're going to hear this time after time after time. Grapes have to be planted in the soils that are appropriate for growing those wines. When they're not, they don't make the kind of wines that are interesting or compelling or age-worthy. And they tend to drive a winemaking effort to cover over those flaws that don't make real natural wines. And you'll hear this from us time after time. I think we've already said it a million times. You got to get the grapes in the right soil, in the right place, in the right terroir. And that's the only, there's no shortcuts. Yeah. There are no shortcuts.
And it's, I think points to, we've had a few questions about use of cement and you know, I love the questions you guys are asking because they're asking about different kind of questions about oak barrels, questions about cement, questions about the vintage conditions. That's what it's all about. And it's much less about the identity of a variety always tasting like this, always being good or always being bad. It's about where it's planted, how it's treated. Mm-hmm. You know, to answer a specific question about cement, you know, we have talked about cement a lot with Zinfandel and Sauvignon Blanc. And it's interesting because we've experimented with cement and Merlot, and we have divided results. There's Merlot that grows on certain kind of subtypes of clay and certain clones and certain rootstocks that we grow Merlot on that do very well in concrete. And those tend to be the blocks of Merlot that tend to have a little bit more of that bright red fruit. The concrete concentrates that and really expresses that joy and youthfulness and that beautiful red fruit. Whereas the Merlot that tends to be a little bit darker fruited and have a little bit more tannin doesn't do as well in the concrete. And that's all just...
I think we're really in the early stages of experimentation on this.
No, exactly. But it's interesting because we don't have firm answers on it yet. It's stuff that we're still experimenting with. Certainly, I think with at least the last 3 vintages of Merlot, we've had a little percentage of a very small percentage of the wine that's been in concrete. But that's us just continuing to experiment and continuing to explore this wonderful grape that has all of these different minutiae that, you know, really gets lost in the discussion about, you know, hey, is Merlot good or is Merlot not good, or you know, how is it affected by?
There's a question up on my screen about some of the challenges of in my early days, and I think it's really how much, because part of this green methoxypyrazine sort of character is very much a part of the variety, and it's how much of that are you willing to accept in your wine? Because we were just starting the steroids era of Napa wines, and we were producing this where greenness was starting to become a persona non grata, if you will, even though look in this wine, that greenness now gives us all the cedar and the cigar box and all the wonderful aromas that this wine has.
Yeah, I think you guys probably have, if you have 2 or 3 of the wines in front of you, you have probably one of the best side-by-side examples of why greenness is important and why and the role it plays in red wines in Napa. Where you're right, Deb, what we jokingly call the steroids era of Napa, the kind of, you know, big, right, the 100-point wines that we love to lampoon and all of that. in those wines, there was this, greenness was a 4-letter word. It was the thing, your wine can't taste or smell green, and you don't want these, what are called methoxypyrazines. What's a methoxypyrazine?
Yes, what is a methoxy? It's even
well, let me tell you, there's a lab coat over here somewhere. So a methoxypyrazine, or an MP, we'll call them, it's a aroma compound in a wine. It shows up in Cabernet Sauvignon. It shows up in Merlot. It shows up in Sauvignon Blanc. It also shows up in green bell peppers, which is where it was actually discovered for the first time.
Identified as
the specific aroma. And if you smell it, it smells the pure aroma. I've had the distinct pleasure of smelling it as a pure aroma chemical, and it's very unpleasant because it's an extremely potent aroma. In a typical Merlot wine, you'll only have 20 parts per trillion of this methoxypyrazine aroma compound present in the wine. It's very, very, just an astronomically small part of this wine, but it has this outsized impact on the wine, and its impact and how it develops in the wine is often misunderstood, where the thought was for a long time, oh, you don't want any of that because nobody wants their wine to smell like green bell peppers, which is mostly true. You don't necessarily buy a bottle of Merlot thinking, hey, I want to smell green bell peppers. There's the green bell pepper aisle is over there, and it's a lot cheaper. But with the lineup you have in front of you, you can see some of the development of that herbal greenness as a young wine and how it develops over time. So all of the kind of the forest floor, the earthy aroma, the complexity that you're getting in, even in the 13, but especially in the 03 and the 93, are results of that proper management of the greenness in the wine. What is a methoxypyrazine? It's an aroma compound that the plant itself produces as a response to stress and as a response to shade on the grapes.
Shade and also insect pressure, right?
Insect pressure.
It's a natural-based insecticide. So what causes a shade? All these things create more vigor. More vigor attracts insects, and so this is the vine's natural defense. And so what causes vigor? Again, the wrong grape in the wrong soil, too much water, therefore irrigated grapevines, big problem. Too much fertility, adding fertilizers as opposed to organic farming. All these things fit into a continuum of information. You guys know, if you've been listening for 6 weeks as we talk about organics, and next week, and by the way, we're going to put a lot of this together and talk about sustainability and about climate change and about what we have to do as a winery in anticipation of a changing climate and ecosystems. It's going to be a fascinating week next week, and tasting some Zims along with that. So we hope you guys are back for that, because this is really, you're getting into the heart and soul of Frog Sleep when we talk about sustainability next week. Yeah.
And that'll touch, we'll go a little bit more into dry farming. We'll go into, which is a little bit more of the kind of specific topics, a continuation of our discussion the other day. But we'll touch on broader topics as well, and really get into some of the impacts of all of this. Specific to dry farming data is its impact on the complexity of Merlot, which I think it's one of the grapes that we grow that is most impacted by our decision to not irrigate our grapes. Our decision to try to balance the natural vigor, the natural growth of these vines, to create the right conditions for balanced flavors in the wine.
No doubt
because it's Merlot, with the absence of any kind of methoxypyrazine, any kind of green herbal influence, is boring. It's a wine that's just and merely
diluted of its character.
And a wine that, to be fair, a wine that you've irrigated the heck out of and allowed to grow really big and allowed to shade all the fruit, and the vine has responded to all that shade by going, okay, well, I'll produce more methoxypyrazines and give you a very green grape. Those wines aren't very pleasant either. So we try to find somewhere in the middle where you have a vine that's naturally in balance with where it's grown. It's producing grapes that have a little bit of that character, but also a lot of the fruitiness, a lot of that California sunshine, and you tasting in the Frog Sleep Merlot that balance between those two elements. And I think that's what's really difficult about Merlot, is because it's so easy to just say, well, we're just going to get it up to a really high ripeness level. We're going to burn out any greenness in the wine. and it'll just be merely fruity, and that's good enough. And the problem is that it's not good enough.
It's not, if any one variety where it's not good enough, it's Merlot, and that's really the tragedy of this variety is that it will genially accept, bad treatment and make a basic drinkable wine. But to achieve this level requires so much effort and so much thought.
And I think there's a cool question on here about, are there other vintages of your Merlot that you think are really stand out? And I think that it's interesting because it's one of the varieties we make that's most sensitive to vintage differentiation, where, if you're tasting if you have our 2017, which is our current release, many of you have probably tried it. 17, a very warm year, very lots of rain, but then this very, very hot summer. I think that was a Merlot that was good out of the gate. It had a little bit more of that ripeness. It had a little less of the kind of cool climate, cool vintage kind of influence. It's a wine that took a little bit less time to develop and bottle, whereas the 2016, 1 year before.
So did you predict a shorter lifespan for that wine?
I don't know. I don't think so, because I think we're tasting multiple different kinds of influences on these wines and seeing that they can go different directions at the same time. I think that with cooler vintages, 2016, 2011 is perhaps extreme example of a wine that is difficult to understand upon release, and is sometimes you can drink I certainly, when I drank the 2011 right after we released it, I go, whoa, this is a difficult wine. It's a very difficult, it can be a difficult wine to understand, but even a year later, it's a wine that expands out and really shows a whole different side of the grape. And so that's what's interesting when talking about whether it's a standout vintage or not, is that you're almost showing, different vintages will show.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Is a standout vintage for Cabernet the same as a standout vintage for Merlot, grown in the same region?
I think they behave with similar, not the same, but similar personalities in a way, where, you take our 2016 Cabernet, or I tasted our 2011 Cabernet. The same
I don't know the answer to this, so
no, I'm making up. It's a good question that you've never asked me.
You're bullshitting.
No, I'm not bullshitting, but I'm trying to think, because it's an interesting question.
Can we say that on a family show?
We can, yeah.
Hey, speaking of family, can I give a shout out to my brother Jim? Jim, you may not know the difference between Cheval Blanc and Petrus, but you've supported me all the way along here, and I want to raise a glass to you, brother. Been listening in every week. You're probably sleeping at this point. I know this is pretty boring, but good to hear from you. And a special shout out to everyone who's been with us over these 6 weeks. Bill and Jeannie Queen, dear friends. Bill sent me 2 pages of how we can make this show better. Bill, I promise to read that next week and see if we can work that into our repertoire. But Darren and Peg, so many people that have been joining us, Heather sending me nice emails talking about the traditions that are growing up around these tastings, where you're commuting with your family and so on. And look, I know we're all talking about strange times right now, but I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I know how we feel, and that's it has really been a privilege and a pleasure to connect with you through these shows over the last few weeks, and then when we hear that it's that you guys are having fun with this, you found it as an excuse to taste and connect with other friends. I understand there's even Facebook.
I've never heard of it either.
Group surrounding this. I think it's pretty darn cool. And I don't know why anyone would sit around and listen to us pontificate about Merlot for an hour, except I really enjoy this a lot. And
we said this a few sessions ago, Deb, but I think it's even more true now, as we're getting deeper into this. We're getting photos of you guys at home with, you've got
some pretty fabulous meals.
Some good looking dinner. Yeah, send some our way, right?
Yeah.
I'm eating cold lentils tonight, But
if anyone that makes duck à l'orange go with Merlot, would you please send me a picture, because I don't even know what it looks like.
It's incredible to be able to share the table with you guys, to be able to share, really virtually share a meal with you guys and share the wine. And that's, it's kind of funny. We often joke about how we end up having to drink a lot of our own wine because And so we might as well make
it's
some
pretty
wine.
damn good. I mean, 100-point wines cost a lot of money. You might as well make your own.
They do. But you know, we like to make wine that we like to drink because we drink it at home all the time, and it's still I think for you. I mean, I've been here with Frog's Leap now for almost 10 years. You've been making Frog's Leap for 40 years. I think it's still incredible that to just be able to share wine with you guys over time, and be able to share, you know, wine with you at your table and see photos of that is just one of the coolest things. It remains just extremely fun.
Well, and we know a few people who have tuned in who are from the trade, who are in the business of wine. I see Christy Bird's name up here. I know Chris Conrad's signing in this time. I'm Matt Shivian back in Boston. Many friends who sell our wine around the world are joining in. It's really a profound sign of boredom, I suppose, on your part, but we're glad to have you guys here, and you're part of our family too, very, very much so. And sorry, Merlot's making me nostalgic trying a 93.
Are you going to shed a tear?
No, I'm not, because I'm pretty fired up about reconnecting with all of you and making this day drinking with John and Rory part of our regular week now.
I mean, we used to just day drink, you and I alone on the porch, and now we get to do it in front of a camera, you know, make it official.
Well, we'd love to hear. I think this has been really interesting to try wines 10 years apart. I hope you guys got as much out of it as we did. We do see all your questions coming in, so keep those coming and have a lot of fun with this.
And like we said, we are, you know, the next session we're going to do is going to be the sustainability and stewardship session, which is really that's kind of a catch-all for extending our conversation from a couple weeks ago.
And then you know what's happening the week after that.
Yeah, you're taking a vacation, basically.
I might be, yeah. I might go down and hang out on the porch with Tony Truchard because you and Anthony are going to do a show together, correct?
So, you know, we've been talking about family relationships and family winemaking. I'm going to be hanging out with Anthony Truchard of Truchard Vineyards in a couple of weeks. As many of you know, Truchard Vineyards is the sole source of our Chardonnay, has been since 1985. And so I'll be hanging out with Anthony talking about how we do it better than Dad, basically.
Yeah.
We may cut to a live feed of you guys snoozing somewhere.
We'll be just sipping the wine.
Sipping the wine in your rocking chairs going.
I feel that sounds good to me.
But that'll be very cool because, you know, we talk about, you know, obviously my dad and I, it's a thrill for me to be on here with my dad, but
it should
winemaking is multi-generational, and the long view is what is important. And we hope you guys get that, a little bit of that out of what we're talking about today, which is, you know, we're not necessarily thinking about sideways or, you know, current market trends and how are we going to market to millennials? My God, you know, it's
that's an oxymoron as far as I can tell.
Exactly. So it's more about planning for the long term, planning for the right grape in the right soil, and planning for the next generation. And that means the next generation all over the winery, not just in winemaking. It means making your business a place for sustainable growth for a long time. And, you know,
we have to, it would be remiss of me not to say that your support over these last few weeks have been sustaining us. We mentioned it in a couple other programs, is that we are keeping all of our employees here at Frog's Leap busy and employed, and we think that's the best thing we can do. And your support of these tastings have been a large part of making that happen. So thank you, the whole Frog's Leap family. Thanks you for that. Hey, we'd love to hear what you guys are doing, that you're getting groups together, that you're tasting. Send us a message or email me, john@frogsleap.com. Easy to get a hold of me. Let me know what you guys are doing. It gives us a big thrill to do so. And like I say, to share 30 odd years of Merlots with you is really cool for us too. So we're getting a lot of fun out of this.
It's send us what you think about the wines, keeping in mind that no wine at Frog's Leap is under 100 points.
Yeah, so it starts at 100 points.
You can go above that if you want. Spinal Tap style, it goes up to 11. But we love hearing about what you guys are drinking, what you're eating with the food, who you're sharing it with. And just thank you guys so much for joining us week in and week out.
So what's your favorite here?
That, it's like picking between children, isn't it? You can't.
Well, I know which my favorite is. Yeah. Merlot.
So good.
So
Thank you
good.
guys.
Thank you guys.
Have a good week. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.